Hi, and welcome to the Many Rules of Film Club. My name is Jeff Yance. I'm the program director at the Loft Cinema here in Tucson, and I'm joined once again, as always, by my favorite cinematic cohorts, the occasional filmmaker, Heather Lades.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Heather, and the multimedia artist, Rusty Boulay Stevenson.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Rusty. So you can listen to the Many Rules of Film Club in many different ways. We have a YouTube channel. You can check us out on Facebook, iTunes, Stitcher. And please, make sure to check us out on Facebook and rate us and give us your suggestions and all of that. And today, as we are in February of 2020, of course, as most people who love films do, we are tending to look back on the previous decade. And so we're going to be talking today about our top 5 favorite films of the decade, 2010 through 2019. The 2010s, as they call them, I think. Yes.
Yeah, 2010s.
So lists. So everybody loves to make lists about everything. We're in a list-mad culture, right?
True.
So what do we think? What is the instinct to make lists? What does that say about us? Why do we do it?
Well, I think part of it is just it feels so solid and so boxed and categorized. Then it's almost like George Carlin talked about the 10 Commandments. He's like, there are 10 of them. It's a nice round number. It's kind of perfect, so it sounds good, right? So it does. It sounds good. A list of top 10 or top 100.
Yeah.
Well, and people like to do their decide what's the best. And what? Best food, best restaurant, best movie, best TV show, best T-shirt to wear in the sun. I don't know. They like lists, and it's easy, a concise way to kind of curate, curate a large topic. So I think that's also why. And I don't know if it's human nature, but I feel like it kind of is because it's a human nature to want to categorize things. So maybe lists is part of that. I don't know.
I think that's part of it. There's also, just for kids, like every adult, when you go on a field trip or whatever with the kids, the adults after the field trip are like, what was your favorite part?
Right.
That's such just a basic question, is to start compartmentalizing that way. It was like, what was the best part of the zoo? Or what was the best part of the movie? And also just the bite-sized chunks, right? Like we like to click on something, the 10 best places to visit in Tucson, because it's going to give us bite-sized chunks, and inevitably in 10 of them, there will be something there for me.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's a lot of noise in culture, and it kind of helps to sort of weed out a lot of the noise and let you focus on things that you like and remember what you liked. And also helps develop, I think, your critical thinking skills. When you're sort of forcing yourself to look back on what did I like and why did I like that and how would I rank that, it makes you a more, I think, sort of active participant in culture rather than just a passive, I'll watch anything and I don't care what it is. And so I think it serves a function for sure. And it's fun. It's fun.
It's fun.
I think ultimately it's just fun.
It is fun. In doing this, it is also ridiculous. In coming up with this list of the top 10, for me to compare Parasite and Bridesmaids, it's pretty tough to do.
Yes. Yes.
How do you compare those two films? I don't know. In the end, Parasite's a few places up on the list from Bridesmaids to me, but I really love Bridesmaids too.
Well, and I think we're all people who watch a lot of films, so I think you could certainly have top 5, top 10 lists by genre, your favorite horror films, your favorite dramas, your favorite sci-fi films. So as you're saying, Rusty, pitting things against one another on a list is a little strange.
Yeah. Well, especially if you consider documentaries.
Right.
Yes.
You almost need to just separate those. I know in mine, in my top 5 is what we're going to go over. I have 2 documentaries. Those are different than fictional films.
Right.
And yeah, you've got at least one, Heather, right?
Yeah, I have one.
So maybe let's set the groundwork. So how did we come up with our list? So what do we look for? So I look at my list as favorites, not best necessarily, because those are often 2 very different things. Your favorites are often not the best films and vice versa.
Yeah, well, I think you're dead on. We all came to that conclusion without even talking about it, honestly, as we all came up with, yes, I'm probably going to like films that are very well made, but it's also going to be something that I'm going to want to watch more than once. It's probably going to be what I consider the best, at least from my point of view, right? Is it's going to be something that I watch regularly.
Rewatchability is key, I think, for me.
Yeah. I mean, there's movies that I could have added to my list, but I don't want to watch again because they're painful or scary or too heavy or whatever. I picked films that are good, maybe even great, but I really want to watch again because I like the story.
Now, let me ask you this. So, something that happened to me when I was thinking of my favorite films of the decade was thinking about how I responded to a film when I first saw it, if it came out early in the decade, say 2012, 2013. Could have loved it then. Thinking about it in 2020, my position on that film has changed a lot. So the ensuing years, as you mature, your tastes change, I think.
For sure.
So did you find that there were films that you were pretty sure that were going to be on your list because you loved them when they came out, and now they're not on your list?
Well, okay, for example, we were talking a little bit about Inception, how when it came out in 2010, that it was brilliant, groundbreaking story-wise, visuals, having that kind of concept story-wise was so good. And I remember being in awe and just like thought about it for so long afterwards. If the ending was real, et cetera, that kind of thing, the plot twist. I watched it now. I still enjoy it. It's still a good movie, but I feel like because it was so popular and so done again in terms of like that kind of storyline and effects and sound and that, that sound, that dun, 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 that sound like was so reused in so many trailers and movies. And it just didn't have, it didn't make me want to put it high on the list. I think it ended up being like my last. If we originally did 15, it ended up being like, I think number 15 or something on mine. But so I definitely wasn't as stoked about it as I was when it originally came out. That's just one example.
Well, and as we've talked about too, there are films that become so much a part, The Matrix is a great example, that become so much a part of the zeitgeist that they become cliches and parodies of themselves after a while because everything else has parodied them. The one I always bring up is The Maltese Falcon. It's a film I really love. When I tried to show my wife the film in her 30s probably, and she'd never seen it, she was like, oh my gosh, I've seen this done so many different ways. It's like, well, sure. I mean, The Maltese Falcon was so influential that it became part of the zeitgeist forever. It's still part of the zeitgeist, right? I mean, it's an important part of film history. And so most films take that into account. Yeah. And so as 10 years pass, films from 2010, a lot of times if they were great, they've become so much a part of the culture that they're not as great. And I've got another example too, is the film, it's a really great film. It's called Hell or High Water. It was nominated for a couple Academy Awards. But it's a film that if it had been made in the 90s, it's probably one of the best films of the 90s. Right. And that's the case for a lot of the movies now, right? So time passes, but now Hell or High Water, it's got a couple cliches in it that are just a touch hard to get past to call it one of the great films of the decade, one of the top 10 or 15 of the decade, because it's a little bit cliche laden. And so that happens too. And like we'll talk about it in a little bit, but romance movies, almost by and large, they weren't made in the 2010s. Right? I mean, that they were made. There were, but not
good ones.
Just a handful.
Not good ones, and not good ones, and not like they were made in the 70s or the 80s.
This was not the heyday of. That decade was not the heyday of rom-coms or.
Love took a hit in that decade.
Love was not a thing in that decade.
Yeah. But also, I think acknowledging that you as a person mature, which hopefully we all do. I mean, maybe we don't mature as much as we would like. But a film that struck you when you were 20 is going to strike you hopefully differently when you're 30, 40, etc. For sure. So nostalgia plays a factor too, because I have a lot of movies that I loved when I was younger, but I would not necessarily today call them one of my favorite films because I've changed.
Yeah, I mean, even just like in the short time, like I was thinking about right now, The Revenant. I loved that movie when I saw it. It got tons of awards, but it's not on my top 15. So, I mean, it's just interesting how we go on these waves and how what sticks around for us individually and what sticks around as a society in terms of what we then consider classics or a staple of cinema or whatever.
And let's just talk briefly about context of viewing a movie. So
Oh yeah.
the context in which you view a movie, I think, really affects how you feel about the movie. And one example I have is the movie Gravity, the Alfonso Cuarón film, which when I saw that, I was so blown away. I saw that in the theater, and the sound design was so great, and the effects, and it was so intense, and I just felt like a ball of bursting nerves watching that film. And it's because of the context that I watched it in the theater with great sound and visuals. And watching it subsequently on home video, it really did not have much of an impact on me at all, I have to say. So my view of it changed completely based on the way I watched it.
That's an interesting point.
And it's still fine. Like, it's still a well-made film, but it's certainly not one of my favorites as I thought it would have been based on my first viewing.
Sure. Right, agreed.
Well, and all of it's changing too, right? I mean, 20 years ago, people didn't have the kind of TV I have in my living room right now. Right? I mean, in 2000, sure. my TV is a whole lot better than it ever could have been in 2000. The sound is better, the picture's much larger, and we've got different ways of viewing things now. I mean, there are so many different subscription services and ways of viewing. One of my films, we'll talk about it later, but one of my films was considered a series on a cable channel. But I watched it online, and it's considered a movie by many people, the director included, so I call it a movie. But so there are lots of ways that's all changing too for us, right?
Yeah. When I think it'll be harder and harder as we go along, because honestly, I've gotten lazy in my later years, and I'm like, can I watch that from home? And I will do that.
My pajamas?
Right, exactly. But the truth is that there's some movies that are not going to have the impact on you, and you're not going to see them as good as others if you don't see them in the theater. You know, like this year's 1917 was amazing experience, one of my favorite films of the year. But if you don't watch that in the theater or with a super duper surround sound and a giant TV at home, you're not going to understand why I think it's wonderful. Right. You know, as opposed to, let's flip to The Irishman. You know, I think The Irishman was fine at home. You know,
and I think a lot of people watch The Irishman that way as a short form television series.
Yeah, they split it up because it was long. It's easy for you to be like, oh, a pause. You know, I try not to pause too much, but it's a 3-hour, 20-minute movie. So I paused a few times where I thought like someone had suggested some good stopping points, and it worked out fine. So I think we kind of just have to rethink how we're watching things. And I don't know. For now, I'm gonna just try to like figure out, would that movie be really good in the theater? You know, before I skip, and try to be better about watching movies in the theater that I should watch, you know, so I get the experience that I always loved that I'm being lazy about right now.
Yeah. Well, and I work in a movie theater, so I have access to a lot of movies on the big screen. And just for me, the theatrical experience can make, this may be a sweeping generalization, but I think any film to me is better seeing it in a movie theater. Just for the most part, just because, you know, you're immersed in the film.
Yeah. Yes.
I agree.
And there's a certain theory, I believe it's called, I think it's called completion urgency.
Okay.
Which sounds weird.
Yeah,
and yes, a
Sexual.
little uncomfortable and sexy. Kind of sexy. But the idea that certain films give you a completion urgency, like you have an urgent need to finish the film in one sitting, which seeing a film in a movie theater gives you that ability to do that. Even like The Irishman, 3.5 hours, I watched that in a movie theater. And I could not have watched that at home in a 3.5 hour block.
Sure.
But in a movie theater, that's easy for me to do because it's pitch black, you have no distractions, you have a huge screen.
Like you're setting yourself up like, okay, I'm cool. I'm going to be here for 3 hours. It'll be all right.
Because you made the commitment.
Right. You made the commitment. That's true.
There's a commitment to drive.
Yes,
you drive to a movie theater. Right. You have to schedule it. It starts when the theater wants it to start. Yeah. You're paying for it. You're buying popcorn.
I mean, I always I call the movie theater my church because it always makes me feel that's the special place ever since I was a kid to go to.
There's a ritual to it too, right? Yes. Like in going to church.
So I think you're right. I do think that if you can, I just but sometimes I do think like, you know, certain movies, okay, not a big deal to watch it at home, you know.
Yeah. Right. The other thing about watching in the theater, and this is again akin to church, is you're sharing the experience with other people. And that's a big deal, especially with comedies and especially with horror films.
And sometimes, like,
Yes.
I remember watching Brokeback Mountain in a theater full of people at the Loft, actually. And I watched it with two of my friends, and I'm bawling throughout the movie. And we're all just, like, passing Kleenex down the row. And, like, by the end of the movie, like, the one, my friend sitting next to me, we're both, like, like, you know, very, like, emotional, intense. And, like, that is not an experience I would have had at home, you know, for sure.
Right. And it tends to become part of your memory of the film itself, the way you saw it and the experience with the audience.
Yeah.
But as you said, some films are fine watching at home, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
You still get the story, you just might not
Yeah.
get the whole intention of the director.
Yeah, no, that's right. I don't think you will get the whole intention as a director, but you can augment it too. I watched Parasite at home, and I got to see an interview with the director after I watched the movie, which helped to answer questions for me. Maybe almost too many questions, because he starts unraveling stuff in a way that other artists don't do. David Lynch never would have offered
he
so many
doesn't say
specifics
anything.
about why he shot things a certain way. And so maybe that takes away in part too. I don't know. There are ways that I ended up watching almost all of my films. I ended up watching them at home, just by the nature of it. It was less expensive. I could break it up. I've been unemployed for a couple months, so I've gotten to sit around and watch movies, which is amazing. By the way, I highly recommend being unemployed for a little bit if you can handle it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I will say that in the past, when most of my movies at home are watched on DVD, if I like the movie enough, like right away after I watched it, I would watch with the director commentary if it was available. So I feel like, anyways, that's an interesting comment on how technology has evolved. And, you know, on Netflix, you're not going to get that most likely. If you occasionally get it if you buy it on Amazon. I don't know about the other streaming options, but you're just not able to get all of that, you know, as much. But it's just interesting how we watch and consume media now, and how there's so many options. I still don't, you're not going to, I never watched a movie on my phone. I know that some people do. That's just not something that I do.
I haven't done that either.
I have watched like a TV show on occasion, but I've never watched a movie because I don't want to watch it on my phone. So people complaining about that. I mean, maybe that's a younger generation thing, but I don't. That's not a thing for me. It has to be on either my big TV at home.
Yeah.
My laptop is like for TV shows, and or a movie theater. So.
Yeah, I have a hard time with the idea of movies as background.
Right.
And I feel like certain viewing experiences put film in that position. Is just something that's going on while you're doing other things.
Right. Yeah.
Not the first time. That's the thing for me, is like I would never do that for the first time. I do sometimes with after multiple viewings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done it multiple different
But I
ways.
would say that's a generational thing too, because a lot of people I know in their like 20s and early 30s, that's the thing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm doing graphic design work and I'm not dealing with words very much, and I'm just dealing with images and placement of images and moving things around, I will put something on in the background there, and sometimes it's something I've seen before, sometimes it's not. Yeah. If it's something I've not seen before, and if I find myself liking it, I'll go back and watch more intently then. But I've watched a lot of stuff that in preparing for this podcast, I've watched a lot of stuff having it in the background. Sometimes, like if I'm making a big dish, like if I make chili or something, I'll put a movie on so that I can have that in the background as I'm making something too.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways to do it, but
yeah.
And having accessibility to home viewing makes you a more well-rounded film lover, I think, because hopefully you take more chances to see things that you can't, like, literally can't see in a movie theater.
You're going to see more foreign films at home because they're just not in the theaters
That's
as much.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think there's definitely some pluses to
that. Okay, so should we start talking about our lists?
Yeah, let's talk about, we decided we were going to do, I suggested to the group here that we would do a top 15 each, and then we would compile those based on a point system and talk about the top 15 movies of the group. But with three of us, the sample size was so small that the diversity of films lent itself to not working very well as a compilation. It would have taken a larger sample size to get something. We did have some things in common and some interesting things that came up because of it. There were two films that were on all three of our top 15 list.
Yes.
Yes.
Was Moonlight
Yeah, Moonlight was one.
Moonrise Kingdom.
And Moonrise Kingdom, which has been a topic twice on the Many Rules of Film Club in Great and Awful Date movies and then the films of Wes Anderson.
Yeah. It might not be his best, but it's his most entertaining, maybe.
And the most Wes Anderson-esque?
Yeah.
Very watchable.
Yeah.
Holy
Super
cow, is
watchable.
it watchable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet it also does a lot of the artistic things that I want too, in that it harkens back to all these different time periods in film history. And it's so well made, as anything of Wes Anderson, and they're all so specifically made and, down to the tiniest details, obviously.
That's the Wes Anderson film, I think, if an extraterrestrial landed in my living room and said, "What is this, Wes Anderson?"
Right.
I would say watch Moonrise Kingdom,
Right.
because that, to me, has all of the
That's true.
elements of a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's like Wes Anderson on steroids, I think.
Yeah.
It's,
When
it's
it's
like
so
the greatest
funny
hits.
when the trailer for French Dispatch just came out, which will be his latest, greatest movie, and there were some people like complaining, and it was like, have you not watched his whole career? He has found his stride. This is what he is going to do.
Yeah.
He won't present necessarily the same story every time, but he's going to give you the same feeling of it's going to be Wes Anderson-esque. That's his thing. Maybe in 10 years he'll stop and do something else. But this is what he does really, really well. I don't know why people were complaining.
That's what they call an auteur.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like you kind of know what their style
I was
is.
like,
and if
y'all
you
are
don't like it-
nervy, like complaining. Stop complaining.
I gotta say, the social media complaining about films and fan things, I think it's made for some bad choices in films. I look at the most recent Star Wars as a great example of just where people think they know what they want, but you spoon feed them and they're not going to want that. What made Star Wars great was Luke, I'm your father. The total surprise of that, the amazing shot that opens the first Star Wars film, A New Hope, right? Like that was stuff that we'd never seen before. That's what made those films great, not seeing stuff regurgitated 100 times.
And that's the eternal conflict in the viewer, right? I think a lot of people think they want familiarity, but what they crave is innovation, but they may not know that going in. But when you see something innovative and new, that's when you get really excited.
They're just not comfortable yet.
But they're not comfortable with that
Yeah.
yet. And if
Be
you see
more
something
brave.
that's too familiar and comfortable, you're disappointed also. It's like, oh, well, I've already seen this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we were talking with Hell or High Water. Like,
Yeah.
there are elements of that just made it was very innovative in some ways, but the fact that it's a retiring cop chasing bank robbers, like, we've
That's unknown.
seen that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, that we all three chose, for our top 15, that we all chose Moonrise Kingdom, but Grand Budapest Hotel is the one that critics tend to put in their top 15.
I did not
of which-
because it's not my favorite.
Yeah, it's not my favorite.
It's
I
not my
agree.
favorite either.
No, it's not. Moonrise Kingdom is far
we
more
agreed
fun.
it's his most accessible. Last on the podcast, I believe.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
It was also his his highest grossing film.
Yeah. Most mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
very well made.
It's very well
Oh,
made.
yeah.
Everything he does is
Technically
super
great.
well made, and the cast is obviously incredible. But Moonrise Kingdom was one that spoke to me and spoke to all three of us. Obviously, this is the third time we've now brought it up on our podcast, so clearly it's a very influential film.
And I feel like I also have a more of an emotional reaction to Moonrise Kingdom.
Yes.
And I think that's a big key in a lot of my favorite films of the decade. Like, what are the emotions? Like, it can stimulate the intellect, but if it doesn't stimulate the emotion, I don't know that it's going to become a favorite.
Right. It doesn't hook you.
You may
Yes,
respect
yes.
you may respect it,
Right.
but you
I
may not
respect
love
a
it.
ton of movies, but I don't want to watch them a second time. That's my thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just as far as if you just look at the history of cinema, like I love Citizen Kane. It's obviously a great film. I'd watch Touch of Evil 100 times before I'd watch Citizen Kane again. Honestly, I just find it a more entertaining
That's fair.
film.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's lots like that. I know that Citizen Kane was more groundbreaking. I recognize it for what it is. But for me, Touch of Evil is more interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, it's like any relationship. You may respect someone, but does that mean you love them?
Does that mean it gets me
Possibly.
emotionally involved? No,
Do I get
not
emotionally excited when I'm around them? Maybe
Right.
not.
Right.
So ideally, you'd have both,
Yeah.
I think.
Ideally, yes, true.
So
But-
there were a few other things I thought that were interesting about our list. We each chose, Paul Thomas Anderson made 3 films. We each chose one of his films, but we each chose a different one.
For different reasons.
For
I
different
bet.
reasons. Yeah, absolutely.
For different reasons, yes.
Phantom Thread really spoke to me. For one, it wasn't what I expected. It was the exact opposite of what I expected for Phantom Thread. I thought it was all about form and style, and instead it's telling you that you have to kind of get rid of that a little bit, the form, right? That's what the woman he ends up using as his muse kind of teaches him, rather sadistically. But I found that just amazing, like, because that's how I kind of see artwork, and so that really spoke to me. Where Heather, you had Inherent Vice on your list.
Yeah, because it's his most watchable for me.
Easily.
Because it's not as, it's one of those movies that I call. I need to come up with a better term, like a one-term word for it, but it gives like texture, like it's so like you're in. It's designed, production design, sound, wardrobe, acting is all so. Like I can touch it, and Inherent Vice is one of those. It's messy. It's one of the ones. I think this is not the only one, but it's from a book, so I'm just gonna go and blame the author, not it. I'm not P.T. Anderson. Not that he's perfect, but yeah, I picked that one because I think it's the best that I can watch anytime.
Oh, yeah.
And it can, I mean, there's still parts that annoy me that I'm like, what's going on? Why is this happening? Is he dreaming? I don't understand.
Is he hallucinating? Is this real?
The scenes, the acting is great. I love it. And it's just so, yeah, I just like it, like the feeling. And so I can watch it. And there are some emotions for sure in it. And there's some funny parts and some angry parts and all that stuff. But it doesn't get me like his other ones, like stab me in the heart and make me sad. And so I picked Inherent Vice.
Well, I think Paul Thomas Anderson is particularly good at creating universes in his films, but also polarizing universes. Both of the films you've mentioned, a lot of people very much disliked.
Yes.
But I think that's a mark of a real artist.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to please everyone, but you're going to do something that's very meaningful to a lot of people, but not everyone. And my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which is actually, I rank this my favorite film of the decade, was The Master from 2012. And The Master, to me, a lot of people, I think, had diverging opinions on it, that it was very heady and kind of off-putting. But to me, it's very emotional. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix is like out of this world in this movie. I think a better performance than he gave in Joker, which he won the Oscar for recently, and similar in a way. He did a lot of things with his body that were similar. And, of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman is just incredible, and Amy Adams and Rami Malek is in it, and Laura Dern. I mean, it's like such a great cast. And I think we all know it's kind of what I was originally interested in The Master for was its connections to Scientology, because I'm fascinated with.
Same.
I'll say cults.
It's a cult.
It's a cult. Yeah. And it's loosely based on L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And but when I saw the film, I realized it was so much more than that. It was really about belief systems and how we need someone to believe in and follow. We need masters, and sort of the difficulty of having faith in anything and how we're grasping at anything. And Joaquin Phoenix just sort of stumbles into this cult because he's so desperate to believe in something. And it doesn't end well for him.
I think it is his best film.
I agree.
I can't watch it again anytime soon.
Nope.
Just for personal reasons. It's very painful to watch, but he's so good at it. Yeah. I mean, like that's all. It's like so painful, but so I get why people. I think it came down to it's such a good friendship, a messed up friendship, and why codependent, unequal friendship, and how that happens.
And also a bit of a love story between the two men, I think.
Yes.
And there's definitely some of that in there, and yeah. And I don't think, like, I normally would say that's definitely was queer baiting, but it wasn't in a way that was deliberate or anything. I think that's just how it was in the time period that they were. And neither one of these men were honest enough with themselves to be able to admit any of that.
It's 1950, just in case people don't know, like immediately post-war, like, World War II.
The singing of the song is like the best love scene. Like, I was like, this is so messed up, but it's so beautiful. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that film is deliberately opaque, I think, and a lot of people that I've talked to said, I just don't know what it's trying to say. But to me, deliberate vagueness and opaqueness in a film is what really draws me in to want to watch it again.
Yeah.
So that I can project myself into it, so it's not telling me what I should be thinking.
That's right.
And I love that. And then just one more thing about The Master, but we're talking about context of how you watch it, and that film was shot in 65 millimeter, and it was released on 70 millimeter film. And it was the first, I believe it was the first 70 millimeter release since Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet in the 90s, in the mid 90s. So it's kind of a big deal, and the movie is just so beautiful. And when I saw it in that format, I was just so blown away by the way it looked and felt and sounded. That's really carried over into my feelings about it, my emotional feelings about it.
Wow.
Some of the shots with him on the ship, it's gorgeous.
When he's passed up, when he's passed out up on top of is it the crow's nest? Is that what they call it?
Yep.
That shot is so cool. The Master is impeccably made. It's the best cast of the bunch. It's really great. Yeah, it's of the three. It's my third favorite of the bunch. I could watch Inherent Vice any time, and I put it. I'll just say this real quickly, but I categorize it a little bit like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in that it's a movie you could start me watching it in the middle of it now, and I just sit and watch it. I don't need to. I don't need to necessarily know what it's about. Yeah, I get that there's a caper, I guess, in Inherent Vice.
Irrelevant.
That's not even
Irrelevant.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all that's the case.
It's the journey.
It's the journey. I guess they call it like a hangout movie or a hang film, right? Where you just hang out in that atmosphere. And Inherent Vice, for me, that's one that I could see it going up my list as the years tick by. Because I have it and I've watched it multiple times now and I really do enjoy it. But Phantom Thread's the one that to me,
love that too.
Yeah, it was amazing, and it just turned so much on its head that I thought it was about in going into it, and I loved that about it. So that's something too that's really the truth and very important too in just watching films is what your expectations are for a film, right? And that's anything in life a little bit. But if you have super high expectations for something and you go in, for Inherent Vice, I didn't, other than it was Paul Thomas Anderson, so I guess I do in that way, but I didn't know the book, I didn't know anything about it, and so it kind of blew everything out of the water for me. And that happens when a movie does that. It's apt to go up my list kind of quickly if it beats all my expectations.
And if you really love a film based on a book, you often want to go read the book. Did you read the Thomas Pynchon book, Inherent Vice, after you saw it?
I didn't end up doing it.
I did that. So The Master's also loosely based on a Thomas Pynchon novel, V.
Yeah, I knew another one was,
I didn't know that.
Which I had already read, so I kind of had that going in. But Inherent Vice inspired me to read the novel, which was kind of a great...
Was it messy too?
Oh, very messy.
Oh, okay, good to know. I was thinking it had to be, because he's not a messy director. So I feel like the mess is kind of like in the story that he got.
Paul Thomas Anderson is one of the most careful filmmakers that I can think of.
Deliberate, everything's there for
almost
a reason.
Kubrickian, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no I'm just going to put that in there because I like it. He doesn't do that.
No.
Clearly not. No, he's the Daniel Day-Lewis character. He's, what's his name, Woodcock. He's totally that guy.
Yes. He will drink our milkshakes.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean everything's just so meticulous in his dressmaking and his filmmaking, obviously. And I think he knew that when he made Phantom Thread, right? That it's a little bit about him. More so than his other films, I think.
I'm sure, yeah.
That I get the sense that he's so meticulous he drives some people crazy.
Yeah, that film felt a little autobiographical to me.
Yeah,
even though it's a fashion film,
right?
But definitely it's about filmmaking for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
So interesting that we all picked Paul Thomas Anderson. I think we all love Paul Thomas Anderson, and he strikes us in different ways at different times. But I could really watch any of his movies at any time.
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Me too. We're all big Paul Thomas Anderson fans, obviously.
Magnolia. Always Magnolia. So let's maybe talk about our top 5.
Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah, let's start with number 5.
Okay, so number 5. Okay, Rusty, what do you got?
So for my number 5 film, it's an animated piece. as we said, all this speaks to us personally, but I chose Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as my number 5 film.
It's a great animated.
Yep.
It is astounding.
Yeah.
I can't speak highly enough of it. It's one where I did go in with I didn't know what to expect, other than I saw that, like, the New York Times gave it an impeccable review, and I'm like, okay, well, we need to see a movie. We're on vacation, and we were vacationing in a little town, so let's go see a movie, and family film, and it just blows me away. So much of it. The soundtrack is amazing. It's so much fun. We play that soundtrack in our car a lot because it's so much fun. We all dance to it and sing to it. And just, if you don't know, it's Into the Spider-Verse. It's talking about, like, multiple dimensions, essentially. And you start watching this Spider-Man movie from another dimension, where it's not Coca-Cola, it's like cola something. And Spider-Man exists, but all at once, that spider that made him, the radioactive spider that made him Spider-Man, has now bitten another person, Miles Morales. And so it turns the Spider-Man story a little on its head, and it does so in such a tongue-in-cheek way. It starts out with essentially like, okay, for the last time, here's my story.
Right.
Because we've all heard the Spider-Man story. He's one of the most recognizable comic book figures there is. And so that it could take a story that we all know inside out, that's been remade multiple times now for small screen, for big screen, and turn it into something that was for a modern day audience, that allows minorities to shine, that allows women to shine. There's nothing like seeing the first time you see the Doc Ock in this new universe. She's just amazing as Doc Ock, and it's so cool. And then you get the introduction of Nick Cage Spider-Man, who's this noir Spider-Man, and Spider-Pig, which has been alluded to in other films from The Simpsons, but now we actually get a Spider-Pig.
Anyone can be Spider-Man is kind of
anyone.
the gist.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And that was always at the heart of Spider-Man a little anyway, is that Peter Parker was a normal kid.
Right.
But it just shows you all the different varieties of ways that, we all could be Spider-Man, that anybody could be. There's an out-of-shape, grumpy Spider-Man who doesn't want to do anything and who's lazy and really just wants to lie around. But so there's just so much working for the film. The cast is incredible. The animation, it mixes 2D animation with 3D animation in a way that we had never seen before. I was at Adobe Max when they showed us a preview for it, and we were the first larger audience to see it. It was a few thousand people, and I was just blown away by the animation. When I saw that, I was like, wow, that's going to be something. Yep. And then that it made such an amazing story too, that turns the Spider-Man universe on its head and opens it up to all these different possibilities moving forward. I really want to see a movie with the Nick Cage Spider-Man again.
Yes, please.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
We all want that at this point. And it really stuck with me. It's one of the films that I've watched by far the most. I watched it again the other night. My wife and I, without our son, just popped it in, and oh my gosh, it's just so good. Everything about it, and it's so funny and it's so heartfelt. There are scenes between the young Spider-Man and his dad that are just so sweet and so funny. When the dad's a police officer and calls him from his loudspeaker, come and say you love your dad, and hug your dad in front of his friends. So many things about it that are just so sweet and funny. It easily one of my favorite films. There's something I haven't watched yet, but on the DVD or the Blu-ray, there is an alternate universe version of the film. Oh. And so I started watching it, and I'm like, oh, I don't have time to get into it, but it starts with Spider-Pig. Does the alternate version alternate universe version of the film. So there's even an alternate universe of the film, of the film itself.
Well, I love that too. It's very modern in how inclusive it is. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like, the future of superhero movies.
Should be.
It should be.
Should be.
Hopefully, ideally. Yeah. Hopefully.
Without a doubt. And so easy film for me to recommend. One of the best films for sure of the decade. For a variety of reasons now, it's probably not in my top 5. It's probably number 6 because I saw a film on Jeff's list, but I won't talk about that one until Jeff talks about it. So Spider-Verse, number 5 for me.
Intrigued. Okay. Heather, what was your number 5?
My number 5 is, we're going to slow down for a second,
Yeah.
is a Swedish film from 2019, I think, or 2018. It is called, I'm probably going to say it not the right way, but it's Aniara. It's Aniara. If you want to look it up. Swedish film. It's a sci-fi. It's actually based on a poem from 1956, which is very odd that you're going to make a sci-fi movie about a poem that was from the 50s. But how much foresight do you have that the poem is of the same name and it was by Harry Martinson. But like some dude in 1956 came up with this poem about a ship getting off course and how it kind of went around floating in space. It's kind of like how the movie is, which is, you know, post-apocalyptic, Earth is no longer habitable. This giant barge of a like cruise liner spaceship is going, it's supposed to take 23 days to get to Mars because people are living on Mars now because Earth is really shitty. And so yeah, it's pretty early on when they board the ship. There's this one woman, you meet her, and she, the one important part is she runs this thing called the Mima. And what is it's kind of like a psychic theater where you go into this room and you're able to kind of teleport your brain back to Earth or to what your vision in your brain is of Earth. And you kind of reconnect with those images of like water and sand and dirt and green and whatever memories are coming back from when you lived on Earth. It's something to like, in the beginning of the movie, it's seen as entertainment. And as the movie goes on, it seems it's like a lifeline to back home to something that's not the ship. So early on, the ship goes off course. They realize that for whatever reason, they get knocked off their main course to Mars. And so they lose all their fuel and they're just floating in space. And so initially the ship's captain says, oh, we might be off course for 2 years. What we need to happen is, you know, do the whole, which I want to talk to an astronaut or astrophysicist to find out how realistic it is. Because you see it a lot in sci-fi is the whole, like, if you can use a planet's gravity, you can slingshot around it.
Oh, that's real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's what they talk about. But they need to find a planet to use the gravity. And that they're floating in space. And so it just, I like this movie because, and it's on Hulu. So if you have Hulu, I encourage you to find it. Because I'm a huge disaster movie fan. I am a nerd. And if you listen to our disaster movie podcast, I used to like pretend in my bedroom as a kid about disaster situations. And this by far is one of the best portrayals of what I think disaster situation would be, because they really show how it affects you day to day, how you're getting food, how as the years progress, because they do, how people get their hopes up for certain reasons. Like they found this object in space and they thought that would save them. So they work even harder. It gives people something to go to live for, to see if this object in space will give them power. And of course it doesn't end up doing that. They can't even open it. It's made from some material that they don't understand. And, but you learn how all of these people who are on the ship who are just looking for a trip, and they're either some professional, like one of the women is one of the scientists, and she tries to help them try to find a way to get back on course, and of course they don't. Anyways, as the movie progresses, it's just, there's a love story in it that's so tender, and I will say it is a bit of a tragic story. So if you're not into that, maybe not, but the sci-fi and the part of how people live is so genuine to me and so emotional that I think that's what makes it stand out for the other sci-fi movies. It's very Swedish, and how they view the world and how they are. So that's a thing. So if you haven't seen a Swedish movie, it's kind of like not as dramatic over the top as it would be like a US version. But it's true. Like, to me, it's more realistic and honest.
And more philosophical,
Yeah.
I think.
Existential. Like,
Yes.
They were saying if Bergman made this movie, I mean, this
Yeah.
would be it if he made a sci-fi movie. So, like, what is our purpose? I mean, you're stuck in a ship, so you're trying to figure out what is my purpose in the world, you know? How can I survive this? Am I going to survive this? And anyways, for someone who I'm not too keen on watching, like, super emotional movies all the time. super sad movies rather. I love this movie. I watched it more than once. So I highly recommend it. The art direction's great. The sets are great. You believe that they're on the ship. The acting's great. It's actually co-directed. So which I always found interesting when two people direct and it ends up to be a coherent movie. Cast is great. Anyways, I encourage you guys to watch it. It's if you like sci-fi and like apocalyptic stuff, like totally down your alley probably.
It's really on my list now for sure. That's one I haven't seen of.
Yeah, it's good. It's
Really
good. I've
looking
seen it.
forward
One
to
of the
it.
best sci-fi Swedish disaster films I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a good. I've watched the other ones, and this is one of the best.
Yeah.
And I would, and you know, to me, like honestly, it's so good that you're not at some point. I mean, I don't mind subtitles in any way, but you kind of get what they're doing anyways, regardless of the subtitles. You know what I mean? So.
And encourage you to listen to our first 2 episodes, which were about disaster movies.
About disaster movies.
Our
yes.
very first 2 episodes.
Go back and
were,
listen. Yeah.
Yes. I am too fond of disaster
Yeah.
movies. I don't think I had disaster scenarios in my bedroom as a child, but so you may top me on that one.
Oh, explain so much
But
about me.
yeah, exactly.
But anyways.
So my number 5 film is maybe one that I feel like people haven't seen necessarily, called Boy, but it's by Taika Waititi, who of course just won an Oscar for the screenplay, writing the screenplay for Jojo Rabbit. So this is his first feature film. He made it in New Zealand, and it's this extremely sweet, charming, fun, emotional film about a young boy whose mother has to leave for various reasons.
Well, no, the mom's dead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, she leaves.
Yeah,
She leaves the
This
planet.
earthly plane.
She dies, and she leaves the boy and his brothers and sisters alone. So
with his grandma.
with the grandma, and the dad has to come back. And the dad is played by Taika Waititi. The dad has left previously, and he's a tad immature, I would say, kind of living in a fantasy world.
He may have broken out of prison this time.
He may have.
We don't quite know.
That's part of the mystery, sort of, like exactly what is the dad doing. But it turns out that the dad is coming back because maybe he's buried some money on the land, and he's going to be looking for the money. Ostensibly, he's going to take care of the boy and the other kids. But then it turns out, the kid is teaching the dad, how to be an adult. And it's very charming. As I said, it's very sweet. And to me, this movie sort of started I really love Taika Waititi as a filmmaker and as a persona, as a writer. And this film sort of crystallized early on, like all the things that make him such a good filmmaker, that he's very empathetic and emotional, and he's also funny and offbeat. And the film is sort of slight. I mean, it's not an epic by any means. It's not about a lot of grand themes, but it is sort of about everything. It's about relating to other humans and how you relate to your parents and
Growing up.
And the New Zealand landscape is really just amazing, and sort of
Beautiful.
the atmosphere of New Zealand. And Taika Waititi, of course, has gone on to make a lot of great films like Hunt for the Wilder People and What We Do in the Shadows and Jojo Rabbit and Thor Ragnarok. And I think a lot of people who maybe discovered him through Jojo Rabbit, because that's been his biggest film, aside from Thor, which, had its own audience to begin with.
Yeah.
I think if they go back and sort of rediscover some of the older Taika Waititi films, they would really find something they can enjoy in every film. Because I think if you like what he does, you like all of his films, which I do. So Boy, that's it. So I have a really emotional attachment to him as a filmmaker, and therefore Boy has a strong emotional attachment for me.
It's such a sweet film. My wife and I watched it just yesterday, in fact, maybe 2 days ago. It's all blending in. That's what happens when you're unemployed. But we watched it, and I really loved it. I really had a good time watching it. My wife adored it and was crying through it and reacting in ways that I'm not quite used to seeing her react to a film, just where it really drew her in. And really, she was just crying at times. And when the dad at one point tells him, "Don't call me dad anymore."
Yeah.
And my wife's like, "Oh," it was
That
a gut
hurts.
punch to her.
Yeah.
It really was.
I haven't watched it, but
It's so good, Heather. You should definitely check it out. Boy, it was interesting to see it on your list, Jeff, because like you're saying, it's not, it's not Phantom Thread. It's not like this immaculately made film that I didn't see it on very many best of lists.
It's very scrappy. It's very low budget. It's
low budget.
Very indie film. And speaking of how things are different from 2010 when the film came out to 2020 when we were making this list, the film ends with all of the cast recreating Michael Jackson's Thriller dance.
Oh my gosh.
Which when that film came out, I remember it was such a cool I mean, it still is a cool thing,
it's
you know,
cool.
but it's kind of tainted, of course, by what's the revelations of Michael Jackson since then. But just the fact that Taika Waititi just threw this in there is like, okay, because he loves Michael Jackson. He's often said that. He said, I just want to do the Thriller dance, and I want the cast to do the Thriller dance at the end of this movie. And they do,
That's
and it's
fun.
this kind of great, joyful moment. And it doesn't necessarily fit thematically.
No, in fact, I don't know that they're there. Aside from wearing the clothes, some of them, so that they're identifiable, I don't know that they're in character in that moment. Because
I think it's the actors.
Boy, the character, the man or the kid who plays Boy, he does all this stuff with his face in the dance that he's never confident enough to do as the character in the movie.
Right.
And so I feel like they're just there as the actors. They're not in character, aside from the fact that some of them were wearing the clothes from the movie that they would be wearing.
It's a goof.
It is a goof.
They break the fourth wall at the end, and I love it.
I really enjoyed it. I was glad it made your list because it made me go see it, and I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. Not for a while, probably, because I just didn't know it existed.
Yeah, check it out. Taika Waititi. He's great. Okay, so what about our number 4 picks? Rusty.
Well, so, and this just shows the absurdity of these lists, is of course I follow Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse with The Act of Killing at number 4.
Yeah.
The Act of Killing is a 2012 documentary film directed by Joshua Oppenheimer. And he got all this footage, and then he showed it to, I think, Errol Morris first, but Errol Morris and Werner Herzog then became producers for the film to help post-production get done because they felt the film was so powerful. It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary. It is about the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 and 1966. They were essentially just killing anyone who happened to belong to the Communist Party. By the way, the United States totally backed the killing of all these quote-unquote communists. They weren't really. They just... and they weren't bad people. These were just people, is all they were. And so what this does is it follows one of the people who committed all of these atrocities. His name is... pardon me. So it follows Anwar Congo, who was one of the perpetrators of all these mass killings. He probably killed 1,000, maybe 1,500 people. And they get him to reenact it, him and his buddies, his henchmen. Here, years later, decades later, they get them to reenact the killings. And then they start watching their dailies. So they're watching the stuff that they've shot. And the guy... Anwar is like, oh, I'm wearing white pants there. I never would have worn white pants when I was killing all those people with that wire cutting their throat because they would have gotten all bloody. And I never would have done that. So when we reshoot it, I want to do it like this. And they are considered heroes in Indonesia still, although it becomes very murky as to whether modern day. But interestingly, this is another film that was co-directed. And it was co-directed by one person who's anonymous. And one of the camera people is anonymous because they're from Indonesia. And if their names were known, they likely would be murdered. It is a film that is unlike anything you've ever seen. In addition to recreating these scenes, they then go on to make a music video about the killings, in which the people who were killed forgive the butchers who did it in the music video. It's absolutely bizarre. I found myself so angry at times at the movie as I was watching it. Again, I'm watching at home, and I was yelling I was yelling at the screen.
That's the good part about watching at home is you can yell.
You can yell, and
yes, that's right.
I was so mad at them, and you will be too. You can't watch this and not be angry about how they talk about killing people. They're just so happy with it, and so, but, and I'm like, you people are the worst of humanity. But then I'm like, well, but they're humanity. This was backed. These killings were backed by the United States of America. That's you and me and our tax dollars. Of course, I wasn't alive in 1965, but nonetheless, my parents were, and they were paying tax dollars for it. But we were doing that in the name of getting rid of communism, when all it was really doing was just killing these average people. Honestly, if they thought you were a communist, they'd just kill you, and they were revered. And there are some scenes that are unbelievable. They get interviewed on TV about the making of the film, and that will blow your mind. Everything about the film is kind of mind-blowing. If you get the DVD, I couldn't even find it on Blu-ray. If you get the DVD, it comes with a director's cut that's about 30 minutes longer, and it also comes with commentary, and you get to hear the director, Oppenheimer, with Werner Herzog talking about the movie, and that is fascinating stuff. Like, again, I couldn't have done that if I wasn't watching at home, but getting to hear Werner Herzog, he's like, when I saw this scene from the music video that they were making, I knew this was as important as a scene as there has been. We're talking about some of the most important things. We will never see this again, where these butchers will be talking about these murders that they committed happily and being proud of it, right? You won't see that again. You won't see that happen. And so capturing that on film, it's, to call it problematic is to undersell it 100 times. You're giving this guy a platform to talk about these horrendous things he did. I don't know if it's good or bad. I know that it's important that we have it on film, and it is humanity. This is if people, the Milgram studies show, if you tell people to do it and you're an authority figure and they're underneath you, they likely will do it just because you're telling them to, even if it is killing somebody, even if it's hurting somebody. And that's where, there's so much you could say about this film.
Yeah.
It left me just stunned and kind of shattered a little bit. It's hard to watch, but definitely one of the most important films I think that's ever been made. I'm like Werner Herzog in that way. I think it's incredibly important to see. Any of my top 5, I would see almost anybody should see it.
Yeah. That film's kind of an ethical quagmire.
Oh, and how?
But I totally agree that I'm so glad that somebody made it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how I feel about it ethically.
Yeah. I don't know that I know how I feel about it even ethically. I'm still very torn by it, and I watched it evidently multiple times. But it's so important, and it's so important that it was made. I really do think that adults should be watching it. I think if you're looking at U.S. history, you get to the 1960s, this is a film you should probably understand to understand what the United States was doing in the name of capitalism and against communism. It's fascinating film, if it is a quagmire and a half.
Quagmire and a half.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, and I don't know how I could tell anybody else how to feel about it, but it's super important.
Yeah, it's great, I think. Heather, what's your number 4 film?
Oh, number 4, Winter's Bone. Let's see. That came out right at 2010. Yeah, 2010. It was that year. It was a bit of a indie darling. It's made by Deborah Granick, who is a great filmmaker, and it was Jennifer Lawrence's first brush with stardom. It really got her career rolling. She won some awards. And honestly, I have not seen every single Jennifer Lawrence movie, but it is my favorite, and I think she is one of her best roles. There's some other ones in there that are good too, but I think when people kind of like, you see her now and she's such a starlight and she does all these mainstream movies, that they forget that she's got some chops, and she really has chops. I mean, it's about, I don't know, is it the Appalachians that this is in? Yeah. And she plays the big sister of a family, very poor, destitute family. The mother is ill, and their father is constantly getting into trouble, and he's missing. And, she lives in this very small shack house, taking care of her mom and her brother and sister, I think. And doing everything, cooking, cleaning, making do with what they have. They have a little bit of a, I guess, farm. There's not necessarily for animals. She's, you see a lot of it is her finding ways to get food and trade with neighbors, that kind of thing. But it comes down to her father being missing and finding out where he is, which apparently she's had to do this before. The house, of course, is going to get foreclosed on. What does she do? It's about, it's a great, in and of itself, it's a great, powerful story that's led by a young woman. And if you look at the whole movie, a lot of women characters. Yep. There's John Hawkes, who is excellent, who is one of my favorite actors. But there's also the first time I had seen her, I'm trying to think about what her name is. She is, 1 second. It is Dale Dickey. That was the first time I have ever seen Dale Dickey, and she's gone on to do lots of roles. I'm so happy for her. But she's a great actress. Excellent. And it goes to show that if you dig enough, there's great actors in Hollywood and across the country that you can use. And using ones that are not necessarily familiar faces, a good thing sometimes. Mm-hmm. Anyways, it goes on to tell her journey of encountering, not so great people who want to hurt her family, trying to figure out where her dad is. And I don't know if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give it away, but there's a part where she figures out where her dad is and she has to do some stuff. And it's like one of the hardest scenes. It's just so tough and emotional, but her character, played by Jennifer Lawrence, just has to be the backbone of that family to take care of them, to make sure they have a roof over their head and find out what happened to her dad. And so it's just a powerful scene, and how Jennifer Lawrence portrays her character is excellent. And they did it on a low budget. I don't know if they got the Independent Spirit Award, but they got a few. Cinematography is great. It's just very cold and dark and got that feeling to it. And it's just well done. I think people forget about this role. They forget about this movie because it was in 2010. I've seen it multiple times and I've enjoyed it. It's also, there is kind of a murder mystery-ish kind of going on.
There's some horrible things that happen,
yes.
like thriller-esque things that
yes.
happen in a boat.
Yes. And it's a bit of a thriller, but also I think like the way they portray her, like, she has to make dinner for the family, for her brother and sister and her mom, who's like basically catatonic, and she's just making do with what she's got. She's putting some potatoes and
she skins a squirrel.
Yeah, she skins a squirrel because that's what they have, and it's just so, I felt like it was real. Like it was a real portrayal of what, and I remember back in the day when I saw the behind the scenes, the townspeople were really excited about the movie shooting there, and they were like, oh, it's authentic, and it gave it some cred, that the portrayal was true.
And it's unusual to see that kind of rural mountain lifestyle depicted in a film,
right, that
plays in theaters. So the class issues are very interesting in that film too.
Yeah, put in theaters. It got like we had I don't know how it happened. I think it was. I met one of the producers because they came to Tucson. I can't remember her name.
She came to the Loft.
Yes. And
right.
We did a little special screening for us too.
Yep.
Anyways, so I respect this film, and it was in the theaters, led by an unknown actress. Granted, she's an attractive woman, but it was an unknown actress. And if you watch the trailer, it wasn't like, this was pre like the complete rage of action movies, of comic book movies that happened. And so I think people forget about it, and Jennifer Lawrence's other roles kind of overshadow it. Yeah. So if you haven't seen Winter's Bone, I highly suggest it. It's a solid, you will not regret watching it. It's a good movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that movie. Okay, so my fourth pick is Dogtooth from 2010. And I realized a lot of my picks were from the early part of the decade. So this was an early film by Yorgos Lanthimos, the Greek director, who later went on to do The Favorite and The Lobster, which is also on my list. But Dogtooth is. So speaking of films that have repeatability factor, I can watch this film a lot. I know a lot of people who said, I saw that once, I could never watch it again. It made me very uncomfortable. I don't know if the two of you, did you see it?
I couldn't find it.
I haven't seen it, no.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's hard to find. It made a lot of people very uncomfortable. And when it came out,
That's always fun.
it came out unrated, but they said basically treat it like an X.
Oh.
But it's not a porn film. But it's very uncomfortable. There's a lot of very uncomfortable things that happen in Dogtooth, but it's really amazing. And just in brief, the plot is based, frighteningly enough, on a true story about a husband and a wife who live on a compound in Greece. In reality, it was in Mexico. They're very rich. They live on this compound. They have 2 daughters that they keep spirited away from the world. They have a wall around the house. They raise these 2 girls so that the girls have no knowledge of the outside world. So the girls never leave the compound. And the dad is basically some sort of like a demented scientist. So he's doing behavioral studies on the girls and teaches them the wrong words for different objects. So he's like trying to like create their linguistic patterns. So if they see, say, a tree, he'll tell them that's called orange. And so the girls have no sense of how people speak language. They have no sense of what the world is like outside until they start getting glimpses of the outside world when, I will say, some other people infiltrate the compound. And one of the girls starts getting smuggled in VHS tapes of films, and one of the films she sees is Flashdance.
Oh, nice.
So she starts getting an idea that, oh, this is what the world is like, welders or dancers, and so a lot of very crazy things happen, and it culminates with one of the girls trying to escape the compound and from her parents. And I won't give it away because it is very surprising, but there's so many great things about this film. Like the mood and the atmosphere is just so kind of tense and unpredictable. You never know from moment to moment where it's going. There's an amazing birthday party sequence where the 2 girls do the dance from Flashdance for their parents.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
With the water?
With the
Or
water.
the shower thing,
no,
or whatever it
the
is?
Maniac dancing.
Oh, the Maniac. Okay, gotcha.
And I'm realizing maybe I like movies with great musical interludes, dance sequences,
Nothing
just
wrong
like
with
Boy
that.
had. But it's yet another good story, kind of like Boy, but in a very different tone of growing up and trying to figure out yourself. It's really a metaphor for how you find yourself. But these girls have this huge obstacle, in that their parents are like complete lunatics, basically, and preventing them from growing up. And these girls are having to figure it out themselves, but they're learning through pop culture. So it's a comment on that, like how we learn through movies and television, how to behave and how to live our lives. It's really pretty brilliant and really deep in a lot of ways, and shocking. Like I said, I think it turned a lot of people off. It surprised everyone that it was nominated for the Oscar that year for Best International Feature Film, and people were very surprised. I was not surprised.
They were surprised because they were like, it's not even rated R.
I know,
What's
exactly.
going on?
Yes. And it's from Greece, and Greece has had a sort of a rocky film industry history. So it sort of signaled a bit of a resurgence in Greek cinema. And of course, Yorgos Lanthimos has gone on to great acclaim and Hollywood success. But this is a very early film for him. I don't know that I could, like, if you love The Favorite, I don't know that you would necessarily say, I'm going to love Dogtooth. But it's definitely worth checking out. And definitely the surrealism of the lobster is also very present in Dogtooth.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of elements, but I would just caution people there is some explicit activity. Well,
Don't watch it with children.
I would not take your kids to see this. But yeah, some sex and violence, but really, really a great film. Very worthwhile.
I haven't seen it, obviously, as I mentioned, but there's a film that came out that is a similar theme, is Brigsby Bear. Did you see Brigsby Bear?
I saw Brigsby Bear, which is, yes, it's a riff on Dogtooth in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a much lighter version of it. It sounds like, but it's still it's still hard. And the folks from Lonely Island, I think, produced Brigsby Bear, but it's a lighthearted version. I don't consider it one of the best films of the last decade, but it is kind of similar, where a boy was kept from the outside world, and then what happens when they have to figure things out for themselves and for
Right.
And so I just throw that out there. I doubt they're that similar, aside from the fact that they're kind of similarly themed. But
yeah, and the fact that this was based on a true story, I think this could have easily been a documentary, because it's certainly a fascinating story. But I think that was very smart to fictionalize it, because he was able to put in sort of the more fun elements, like the flash dancing and lots of references to the videotapes that they're being smuggled into the compound. I think Yorgos Lanthimos is a brilliant filmmaker, so I would highly recommend checking. And you'll also want to see it to find out why it's called Dogtooth.
Yeah,
I will say.
I haven't seen any of his movies, so I need to watch
Yes,
them.
the title becomes very significant.
I'm afraid, but I will watch it.
The Lobster's in my top 25. The Lobster I really enjoyed very much.
Yeah. Also another film that polarized people like crazy.
Oh, yeah. And my wife hated it. My wife hated The Lobster.
That
she
sounds
wouldn't
about
even
right.
watch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
She got mad 15 minutes through and was like, nope, done.
Yeah. But that's
Fair.
Oh.
I'm going to try.
I think that's what I like about Yorgos Lanthimos, much like Lars von Trier, whom I also really like. And Melancholy is also on my list. But there are certain filmmakers who are not afraid to alienate people. They don't necessarily want you to like them. I think they hope you do, but they don't care if you don't. So I think he's one of them, Yorgos.
That's good stuff, Jeff.
Yep. How about our number 3 selection, Rusty?
I'm going to keep this one short, but my number 3 selection is Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
I love that movie.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie. 2011. I'm not going to say much because it doesn't say much itself in words.
Yeah.
What is it about? It's about life. It's about why we make the decisions we do. It's about growing up. It's called. I'm just going to read a little bit from its Wikipedia entry, because it's just so hard to put into words at times. It's an American experimental epic drama film, is what it says. And yeah, it's experimental. The dialogue's weird and sparse, and you just can't catch snippets at times. It feels dreamlike at times. Brad Pitt and Sean Penn are in it. It's about these boys growing up in 1950s America, I guess, in Texas. And one of the boys dies, we're told, later in life. This movie really spans. It starts like at the beginning of time, at the beginning of the earth, and it follows amoebas and it follows dinosaurs for a little bit, and then finally you're in the 1950s and you're seeing this authoritarian father who clearly loves his sons but doesn't know how to express it, and the boys have to carry that with them. It was a profound film for me to watch. My wife in that one, she came about 2/3 of the way through the movie, and I'm just sitting there bawling. I mean, just tears just coming down my face, and at times I'm sobbing and crying kind of ugly, and I just can't quit crying like the last 20 minutes of the film. And in part because I'm sad for the characters, but in part because I'm just sad for how we can't figure out how to live together and uplift one another. And I think that's what the movie's about a little bit. I don't know. You guys have seen it. What do you think what's the movie about?
I would never synopsize Tree of Life.
I don't know. It's not about a tree.
I wouldn't do it.
It's not about a tree.
It is about
a boy,
life.
A man, sadness, life.
It's experimental for sure.
Yeah.
It's Terrence Malick. I hadn't watched any Terrence Malick films until the last year. I like it as well as anything of his. It's profound. I just love it so much. But yeah, to try to put it into a synopsis, into a
Yeah,
paragraph. It just doesn't fit.
I think it's beautiful, and if you're patient and enjoy visuals,
Yeah.
that you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I always tell people that's a film that you have to take a chance on.
Yeah, take the ride.
Because you don't, again, you can't describe it. It's about everything.
Yeah, it's about life.
It does have big stars in it, although it's not a traditional commercial film with
No,
big stars.
at all.
So that's a little misleading to some. I remember when that film came out, how angry a lot of people were. It's like, this is not a Brad Pitt movie.
Well, it's
It's
not.
not.
It's a Terrence Malick
It's
movie.
a, but it,
Hello.
yeah, it's a Terrence Malick film. It's not a
right.
Brad Pitt
It's not
film.
a vehicle, as they call it.
Not at all.
And they're like, why are the dinosaurs in here? Like, just go along for the ride.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, you kind of have
But
to
if
just
you're
sit
not
back
like
and
willing
accept.
to do that, and then don't skip.
Yeah,
It
for
may
a
not
lot
be
of
for
people,
you.
they won't like it. And yeah, it's got Brad Pitt and Sean Penn in it. I don't think of it as them even in it almost. I mean, I know they are, and they're very recognizable. I'm a big both fan. I love Sean Penn, though. But it's not about them as actors at all. It's about the lives of the people in it. And I love it a lot. And very few films have moved me in the way that one did. I mean, I think for the last 15 minutes, I was just crying. And I didn't know exactly why. I can't exactly tell you why I was crying, aside from that it just feels so much like life, and that we don't help each other as much as we sometimes hold each other back, even when we're super close, even when it's our son or our father. Sometimes I'm tearing up.
Yep. Yeah.
Sometimes we hurt each other, and gosh, that's hard to understand some days.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like from a woman's perspective, it's not. I did not have that emotional. I think it's amazing and beautiful, but I was not that. I think it's a very father-son kind of thing, and the woman when she's in it is a very.
She's so important, though.
She is, but it's not.
Her balance is.
She's not. Anyways, I think it leans itself to a very man role, a man's story, man son, father son.
Yeah.
So I was impressed. It was amazing. I would watch it again any day of the week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a movie that swings for the fences.
Yes.
And sometimes those don't pay off, and sometimes they do. I feel like this did.
I don't know many films that swing for the fences bigger. Maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey swings that hard and does it as well.
In a different way.
In a different way, but still is this all-encompassing notion of what is life and what is humanity. And I think Tree of Life, that's if it's about anything, it's about that. It's about life and how we treat each other.
Yeah. And this is probably for another podcast about where Terrence Malick has gone after Tree of Life.
Yeah.
Maybe
Sure. Sure.
that may to me that may have been his last great moment.
Who knows?
But who knows?
I don't know how you make anything better. Honestly, I just don't.
It's not my favorite of his, but
No, I hear you. I hear you. It's not my favorite either. But it hits me in such a way that I was profoundly moved by it, and thinking about it, it does almost make me start crying again. I cry easily.
I was more in awe than I was sad.
I'm in
so,
awe too,
yeah.
and I don't know that I was crying because I was sad. I mean, in part, it's just that it's life. And it's just depicting life in this very real way that, our life isn't a story. Our life does have these points that don't necessarily connect. And
Yeah, and I mostly admired it from the filmmaking perspective. Like
It's beautiful.
like it's a beautiful film, and there are so many chances being made that don't always pay off perfectly, I think.
yeah,
But that's great, I think. It shouldn't be perfect. Life is messy.
yeah,
The film
yeah,
is messy.
exactly.
Yeah. Good one.
Number 3.
Tree of Life. Okay. Heather.
I won't talk too much about it because we mentioned it earlier, but Inherent Vice is my number 3 by Paul Thomas Anderson. And as we, as we chatted before, it's based on the book, and I just love it so much because it gives me a good feeling of being there in that time and that kind of crazy, wacky story. And it made me want to go to the beach too, because
Heck yeah.
the parts where when he's at his shitty apartment and when I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but when the girl comes and goes in his life that then goes up missing, it just gives you that kind of magical feeling in a way, but not like magic like traditional magic, like I'm on a trip. I've never taken acid, but if I did, I'm just guessing maybe it was like that. Magic, not witches and Harry Potter magic. So
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So
I think it's a fair.
it's one of, like I said, it's watchable, so watchable. I love it. I love Josh Brolin. I love Joaquin. I love all the actors in it, even if they are only on there for a little bit. And some of it doesn't make sense. It's a fun ride to go on because the acting is so good and fun, and you're not gonna get. It's worth it because even though you're not gonna get a nice wrapped up bow ending, but it's fun. It's just fun, and it's still got that P.T. Anderson depth of character and creativity that he's known for. It just, I think, also because it's from the book that maybe it's not exactly his. But like I said earlier, it's probably messy because the book is a little messy.
And you get a contact high watching it.
You sure do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
you feel
you're
baked
like,
after you've seen that film.
He's smoking all the time. He's getting high all the time.
Yeah.
So it does give you like that hazy feeling, kind of, because you're like in his haze. Because you're like, shit, he's living his life this whole time like this. And you're like,
detective.
and you're supposed to figure out this mystery or whatever. Yeah. And so, anyways, it's very enjoyable. Highly recommend. I love all of P.T. Anderson's movies, but that one is my go-to when I want to watch.
It's a great film to watch on a double feature with Big Lebowski, which I've done.
Yes, very true. Oh, that's a good idea.
It's good because, well,
yeah.
You know.
Well, you know, I'll say too, what it reminded me of, I call it a cross between, if you've ever seen, there's a great Humphrey Bogart movie that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's The Big Sleep. And William Faulkner was one of the writers on it. It's this enigma within a riddle that I don't know that it matters if you figure out what it's about in the end. So I call it a cross between The Big Lebowski and The Big Sleep.
Yeah. It's just so fun, like learning of the characters and like the scenes, the dialogue. It's great.
Mysteries where the mysteries don't matter are great.
Yeah. Well, and like I was telling you guys too, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is another one where I don't know that it matters what's happening so much as just you're supposed to sit back and enjoy it. And they do capture these moments in L.A., in the L.A. area. There's a lot about them that are really paralleled.
Yep.
A really great film, though. I love Inherent Vice.
Hangout films. Yep.
Yeah, Hangout.
Definitely. Okay, so my number 3 film, and really this could have been anywhere in the top 3, is Call Me By Your Name by Luca Guadagnino from 2017. And boy, I love this film. This is just such a beautiful film based on a novel. And it's basically a very simple story set in the 1980s about a 17-year-old boy who ends up having a brief but very life-changing love affair with a male grad student who is helping his father on an island. They're on an island.
Oh,
and it's
sexy.
It's in the middle of summer, and the dad's a scholar, and the grad student is helping the dad on a project. He meets the 17-year-old son, and it's played by Timothée Chalamet, I guess I should mention, and Armie Hammer plays the older grad student.
Both very pretty.
Both very pretty, and it's clearly the grad student played by Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer is closeted. He has girlfriends, but clearly he, has feelings for men. And the Timothée Chalamet character is 17, and he's sort of exploring his sexuality. He's not sure what he is yet. And there's something about the atmosphere of this film. It's so kind of sensual and hot, not in the sexual sense, but hot in the temperature, heat, sweat.
Gotcha. Right.
I mean, and it's sexy too. It's also a sexy film, but it's really the atmosphere. Everyone is sweating. Everyone's wearing shorts and stripping their shirts off and jumping in the water and like squeezing fruit on themselves and just like desperate to cool off.
All right.
And then of course there's the famous peach scene with,
I've heard about it, but since I haven't watched it, like I've heard about this peach scene a lot.
Yes, it makes you very hungry for peach anything, I will say. But it's sensual, like the ripe fruit, the bursting fruit. And it's a very... Luca Guadagnino's an Italian director, and there's a lot of kind of Italian sensuality in this film with food and sun and clothing. Cigarettes. It's set in the 80s, so everyone gets to smoke. And there's a lot of lounging around. No one seems to really be working much. And so everyone's kind of hot and slow and just drowsy. And it's really kind of amazing. But it's also, aside from the atmosphere, it's really an amazing look at finding yourself. Another coming-of-age film. Kind of finding yourself, finding whether you have the bravery to admit who you are or not, which one of the characters doesn't. And again, I won't give this away, but there's a closing sequence in the film, and he was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor nomination, Oscar.
Army?
Yes, but the actor who plays the dad, who plays Timothée Chalamet's father, they were all nominated for Academy Awards, and rightfully so. But the dad has a very small part in the film, but it really comes to a head at the end when things have gone south with the relationship between Armie Hammer and Timothée Chalamet, and the dad sort of explains to Timothée Chalamet how important it is to embrace these moments and to have experiences and to let people love you, because you will grow older and it's harder and harder to find people to love you and to want to touch you, and it's just so.
Well, it doesn't happen much in life. It doesn't happen much in life that you find.
And these opportunities don't arise, and you need to just take them, and it's really, to me, one of the best father-child speeches in movies.
I think it's one of the best speeches in movies. I really do. I don't say that lightly. It blew me away. This is the film that would jump into my top 5 if it hadn't been in Jeff's top 5, if I didn't know that. I definitely wanted to talk about it, or at least have somebody talk about it for this podcast, because it's such an amazing film, and I was so moved by it. This is another one where I cried a lot, but it's so sweet and so wonderful. And I'm a dad, and it's about summer love, and it's about being a father, it's about being a son, and about just growing up and figuring out who you are. And there's little about that movie that I don't love.
And it's unabashedly romantic. Like, it really, it's not afraid to embrace the kind of melodrama of romance, of these kind of grand feelings you have, and how it feels like the most important thing in the world, your first love.
Your first love does feel that way.
Heck yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think it's almost operatic in the emotions, and I think that's the Italian influence in the film.
Okay.
Luca Guadagnino also later did the remake of Suspiria, which is also fairly operatic, and a really amazing film called I Am Love with Tilda Swinton, which is also about forbidden love and food. Oh. He has a big thing about food and love and sex and
Italians, man.
Ooh. It's an amazing film. The novel is also great. It's a great double feature to see the film and then read the book, because the book extends beyond the movie. So we see what happened to both of these characters after the relationship, which I didn't want to see that in the film. So I think that was smart. It was a great adaptation
to stop it there,
to end at that moment.
Well, I have added it to my list. I will watch it.
One of the best closing sequences I've ever seen, as far as credits rolling.
Yes.
I loved that. You've brought up 2 of my favorite closing credits, the Michael Jackson dance in Boy, and the closing credits in this. It's something else. It also has some amazing sound design. Some of the sounds that you hear of the summer in Italy there, and then obviously the camera work's good, but some of the composition is absolutely extraordinary.
Painterly.
It really has a painterly quality about it. And it knows what to show you, and it knows what to not show you.
Yes.
And it does that so brilliantly. The scene where they end up together, it's so funny and sweet and beautiful and awkward, all of it at once. And animalistic too, right? Like, when you're that age and when you're feeling those things, it's not even something you can help. Right.
No.
And that's really shown in this. It's a beautiful film.
Primal.
It's a beautiful film.
And it's reminiscent of 70s art films. To me, it felt like a throwback to like Bertolucci and Antonioni.
It sounds like it, what you're describing to me.
Yeah, and to me, it felt a little almost out of step with the year 2017, because it felt like a throwback film, which I think is why it was so great and kind of nourishing
How many romances were made that were extraordinary? Yeah. Very few.
That are well done and not made into campy kind of.
Yeah.
And a gay-themed romance.
Right.
At that.
That's why it's also important. It's just representation matters.
Representation matters, yeah. It's a beautiful film. And I would easily place that anywhere in my top 3. I just happened to go with number 3, but it could have been 1 or 2. And it's great.
Yeah, I put it at 3 or 4, I think.
Yeah.
It's where I end up putting.
And sexiest line in the movie comes from this film when they are together.
Mm-hmm. What is
after sex? Is it "Call me by your name"?
Oh.
And I'll call you by mine.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that's a pretty great thing to say to somebody.
Right.
Because your bodies are intertwined, you forget who's who, and you're just sort of lost in the emotion. And I won't go on, but yes, Call Me by Your Name.
We could. Wonderful film. It really is. I knew I was going to like it. I did not know I would like it as much as I did. Both my wife and I, we came away, and it was so sweet. I mean, we're sitting there together, and it was such a sweet moment, just the two of us sitting. And we've gone through some hard times lately, and watching that movie was just so wonderful.
And it birthed the career of Timothée Chalamet. And now we're living in the era
of... Well, now, wait a minute. Did that come first or Lady Bird?
This was before Lady Bird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because he's in Lady Bird, too, which I loved Lady Bird.
Oh, no, he's great.
He's great. I think he's got so much potential.
And I think he's sort of, as we were talking about off mic, I think he represents sort of the new era of film masculinity.
I hope so.
That it's a little more androgynous and it's a little more open to a lot of different kinds of expression. And he dresses really cool at the Oscars and with harnesses and tracksuits, and it's great.
His line after sex in Lady Bird is pretty great too. You'll have lots of uninspired sex. Through your life.
Yes.
Yeah. That's true too.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Chalamet. Okay. Moving on to number 2 as we're careening towards our number 1 picks. Number 2. Rusty.
My number 2 is a Werner Herzog film from 2010. It's Cave of Forgotten Dreams. This is my, I feel like your film that you chose, Boy, was kind of a bit of an anomaly for best of lists. Nobody puts Cave of Forgotten Dreams in their top 10 except me, I don't think.
Probably.
It's a movie about Chauvet Cave in France. It's a cave that was discovered in the 90s after being buried by an avalanche for 30,000 plus years. The cave seemingly served as an art museum for people 30-some thousand years ago. Nobody ever lived in this cave. It was used for two periods of about 2,000 years. It was used for 2,000 years, and then there was a slight cave-in, and then a couple thousand years later, it was used again for 2,000 more years by different artists who went in there. The place, it looks like a mini version of the Grand Canyon, the valley that it's in. And so that in and of itself is awe-inspiring. And so I have to think that people at that time, if they were coming there, they were coming to see this artwork that was in there. And it really changed just because the cave was buried for 30,000 years, it was never ruined by later people. So whatever their art and culture was, nobody ever tried to co-opt it and turn it into something else, because that's probably what happened with lots of art over the years. For instance, in Australia, Aborigines will change art and consider that just part of what they're doing, even though it's almost desecration to think that you would change art that's thousands of years old, but that's just what's always happened. And so it freezes a moment in time that we may never get a chance to see this stuff again. I mean, it speaks to the nature of creativity of humanity and what it is to be a human. And what it is this was the movie theater of the time. These people went in, and if you haven't seen it, you should look up Chauvet Cave. It looks like Chauvet. But this is abstract art. It looks like Picasso went in and did it. And yet it was done 30,000 years ago, and probably the abstract nature of it, and you couldn't see where the art is. You can't see any sunlight. You had to go back there with torches and firelight to even make the stuff or go look at it. And when you do that, you could do it now if you wanted to in different ways. You could try to set it up. But with flickering firelight, it makes it look like stuff's moving. And I could imagine stories being told, creation stories being told that way by going into this cave and you take people to tell them these stories of creation, of how you think creation happened or people at the time think creation happened. It was obviously a place of great reverence. As nobody ever lived there, nothing was ever really left there aside from the drawings. There's like a couple footprints have been found, but very little else. And I think that that's fascinating to think that people were going to, I'm calling it a museum, that people were going to museums 30,000 years ago. And clearly that's what if you see the valley that it's in, to get to this space is incredibly difficult. It couldn't have been easy for people 30,000 years ago to get there, to go deep inside a cave, and then to find this artwork that's abstract and rivals what Picasso did. It blew my mind in seeing it. It continues to inspire me and fill me with awe and wonder at the nature of humanity and the nature of art and humanity. And as far as that goes, film, because these were moving images, I think.
Right. Did you get an opportunity to see this in 3D?
I did not. I would have loved to have.
I got to see it in 3D, and it's pretty amazing. It's one of the better uses of 3D that I've seen.
And they talk about that in the film itself,
right.
that they decided to make it 3D and that it's done for a sense of preservation, because the cave is so pristine and so delicate that they likely won't let more cameras in there again. It's closed to the public. You'll never get to go see it unless you're an archaeologist of great import or something. I don't know who gets to see this cave, but it's totally sealed off. And if the humidity varies very much, then they won't let people go in there for years at a time. And so to me, it speaks to art, and it speaks to the nature of art and humanity, because it's one of the things that sets us apart from the other animals on this planet is we do create this stuff to help us tell stories. And that's very human.
Yep.
That's very human. And it looks at art that's been made now for tens of thousands of years. And so that movie and Werner's telling of it, of the story, really, I was dying to see it, and I still watch it over and over again. It's super important. And that's one of the things that made it an important film to me for the last decade is just what it speaks to as a piece of art.
Yep, it's great. All right, so now moving on to Heather's number 2 pick of the decade.
Oof, sorry. Moonlight.
Yes.
I should have been like, La La Land. Oh, wait, Moonlight.
Missed opportunity.
Well, and the thing is like about that Oscars, my little brief story about that is that I got so mad when they announced La La Land that I turned off my TV. And then I'm on Twitter.
So you missed it.
Right, so I'm on Twitter and I'm like, what the hell happened? I missed I had to watch it the next day when they replayed it, about the whole mishap. And I mean, honestly, if you think back, I mean, I like some musicals, but I really think that Moonlight will stand the test of time, and that La La Land already hasn't stood the test of time. But that's just me. So, I just was so annoyed by La La Land. I mean, it's good, but it was annoying. Anyways. The point is Moonlight. Barry Jenkins, who I think in the end will be one of our great filmmakers.
I agree.
Great American filmmakers, great Black American filmmakers. He's got stories to tell, and the way he tells them are brilliant. And Moonlight was a story waiting to be told. So it's beautiful. If you haven't seen Moonlight, if you are one of those people that, I have a couple of people I know in my life who are like, I don't know if I want to see a gay story. Not because they think they can't relate to it, etc., etc. I go against that thought, and I think people should be watching all kinds of stories, all kinds of love stories, all kinds of genders, all kinds of races. And Moonlight is just so beautifully told. It's beautifully shot. I mean, how often do you see a story of two boys who fall in love, where they come from, how they fall in love, and as they get older, where they end up? And you're just not going to see that, and you're not going to see it win an Oscar. This was like the first time this ever happened, and it's groundbreaking. So I hope that people have watched Moonlight, and that not a lot of people are like, oh, I haven't watched that. But it's worth watching. The older I think all of them did particularly well, but the older actors were on it. Like
Mahershala Ali is so good in that film.
He deserved that Oscar.
Yes, he did.
Was so good.
Yes, he did.
I won't talk about the Green Book. Anyways,
Please don't.
but he earned that Oscar, and the young kids are so good. All of them are good.
Yeah.
And of course the scene on the beach when they're teenagers and is so tender but like scary and beautiful. And then when they're in the diner, when they're older, I just can't say enough about Moonlight.
That final shot in Moonlight in the diner is devastating. That is one of the greatest final shots of the decade.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I don't know. Like I said, I think Moonlight will stand the test of time. It's beautiful. Written, shot, acted. There's a few bumbles, but nothing that's not forgiven. And I don't know. I can't really say much more about it. You guys know, I mean, it's not like it's unpopular, I think. But I think if you haven't or if you hesitated to see Moonlight, I think if you want to see a great love story, watch it. And a beautifully shot film, too. And also, it talks about the relationship of the father figure of a Black child, specifically a son, and is so important, and to be portrayed in such a loving way with Mahershala Ali and the boy in the film is beautiful and important. And like I've said before, representation matters, and we should be seeing these kind of roles with everyone. And anyways, I encourage you to watch it, even if you were hesitant and not into it. It's a good movie.
Get over yourself.
Yes.
That's right.
See it. Yes. Hopefully the Oscar helped with that.
I hope
Got some
so.
people to see it, yes.
Be brave. For whatever reason you're afraid, be brave and just watch it.
Yes, I think watching movies like Moonlight make you more empathetic.
Yes, and more
towards the world and to other people.
I feel like we used to be a little bit there, like we kind of dipped our toe in the 80s, and then a little in the 90s, and then all of a sudden we regressed. Mm-hmm. So let's do more of this. Let's see all the stories from all the points of view.
Yes. Great. So my number 2 pick is very recent, currently in theaters, is Parasite, which of course is, Parasite, which is sort of currently, as we record this podcast now, a phenomenon.
Yep.
The Bong Hive is a real thing, which is great. This is, of course, directed by Joon-ho, the great South Korean filmmaker. He's made a lot of good films like The Host and Memories of Murder and Snowpiercer. But I think this is really his breakthrough film around the world, not just in America. But this is, I've been trying to understand why this film has become such a phenomenon and why it's appealing to so many people. And working at an art house movie theater, as I do, where we show lots of foreign language films, there's a glass ceiling for how much a foreign language film can gross. Because a lot of people just won't go to see subtitle films. I don't want to read a film. I don't want to read a film. For some reason, this has really broken through that ceiling, and everybody seems to want to see it. And I think the reasons are, of course, it's great, but also because it's really speaking to the moment. It's about class warfare. And I think it's very much politically of the moment where we're at now with the haves and the have-nots. But it really just literalizes the struggle in a thriller context. So I think people can respond to it as a good thriller. And there's like shocking outbreaks of violence, and there's a mystery, and it's just really, it's an extremely well told story. And I don't want to say what happens in the film, because a lot of the pleasure of Parasite is based on the surprise of what happens. But it's basically, in general, it's about a family from the lower class in South Korea who infiltrates the household of a family from the upper class, pretending to be service staff. And basically both of their lives are upended. Both of the family's lives are upended in really surprising ways. And this movie is really brilliant because you could read it as, the title is very interesting. Is the poor family, are they the parasites? Or is the rich family, are they the parasites because they're leeching off the labor force, the work of the labor force that they are exploiting? And I think that's part of the brilliance of the film, that it could be read either way, so everyone can find something to take away from it. The cinematography is amazing. The performances are great. It won the SAG Award for Best Ensemble Cast this year, which never happens for a foreign language film. The lead actor has been in most all of Bong Joon-ho's films.
Yeah, Park.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he should have been. I mean,
He's great.
in a perfect world, he would have been nominated for an Oscar.
He should have been, yeah.
But yeah, I think this film will stand the test of time. It also intersects with a lot of Bong Joon-ho's other films in terms of his dissection of class. Snowpiercer was a lot about class. I think Bong Joon-ho is going to be doing a Parasite spin-off TV series, and there's a Snowpiercer spin-off TV series coming. So we're kind of having a Bong Joon-ho moment, which I think is great because I think he's a necessary voice in the film world. And the fact that the film won the Oscar for Best Picture, I think, sends a message to Hollywood that non-U.S. films can actually appeal to U.S. audiences. So let's support those. Let's release them in America.
And challenging films can...
They can do it.
They can do it too, right?
Yes.
Like, it's a somewhat challenging film for an average American viewer, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And working at a theater that's showing Parasite, it's been interesting hearing what people thought it was going in and what they realized it was coming out. A lot of people thought it was a Korean horror film.
I can see why.
Just
if they
based on
saw
the
poster
title,
or the title.
And they hear that there's some like scary stuff that happens in it or some violent stuff. It's like, oh, it's a horror film, which it is, sort of.
It is.
It can be.
Class horror. And I will just also say that it's interesting that Bong Joon-ho made a black and white version of the film because he thought that the black and white would make the story completely different. And I wasn't quite sure about that, but we're currently showing the black and white version at the Loft in addition to the color version. And the black and white version has a totally different feel aesthetically, emotionally. High contrast black and white feels like a film noir from the 40s.
More of a thriller than the color?
More of a thriller, I think.
Yeah.
Less aesthetically alluring than the color version. But I can't say enough good things about Parasite. I just think it's such a great thing that this movie is a success and it's good.
Heck yeah.
And
I think we've all seen it.
We've all seen it, yes. We all agree.
It's excellent.
Great. Parasite.
I saw it the same day I saw Call Me By Your Name.
That's an interesting.
That's a good double feature.
Double feature.
Yes.
It was interesting.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
interesting. A lot of food.
A lot of food.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes. And I also think Parasite dovetails with a lot of what was going on in the film Joker, which came out around the same time in terms of
Oh, yeah, just in a different way. An Americanized way?
kill the rich,
Yeah.
class warfare angst, but in a very different way. But I think they both tapped into something, which is why they were both such big films.
Yeah.
Which leads us to our number one pick of the decade.
Number one.
We made
Rusty.
it.
What is your number one film of the 2010s?
Mine is something that debuted on Showtime. It is Twin Peaks: The Return, David Lynch's piece from 2017. It's a movie in 18 parts, is what he says. So I'm calling it a movie.
Yeah.
Cahiers du Cinema calls it a movie. Sight and Sound calls it a movie. So I'm calling it a movie. But it certainly challenges that. It feels like a TV show. It's based off what was originally a TV show that no one would ever call that a movie. But this does have a lot of cinematic qualities about it, for sure. It's bigger than the original Twin Peaks series. It does so much that's amazing, just amazing. Obviously, it's David Lynch, so the cinematography is amazing. The sound is incredible. The cast is even better than the original cast somehow, yet you bring lots of the original cast back. and then bring in some new folks. Laura Dern's in it in one of my favorite Laura Dern performances. She's Diane. We finally see who Diane is. And yet, even though here it was made so many years after, 20 years after Twin Peaks, it's not going for nostalgia really at all. And in fact, it tells you if you're looking for nostalgia, I'm going to poke you in the eye instead, which is about how it goes. Ultimately, I think when I think about Twin Peaks: The Return, I think it is about capitalism too and about class. Laura Palmer's murder was really because people could exploit her and make money off of her. And we revisit that world again, in which really bare economics drives so many of the characters' motivations. It's really fascinating. I can't speak highly enough of it. Funny, I think, is harder to do than dramatic in film, and to make it last longer. This movie has so many funny moments in addition to absolutely horrifying moments, and absolutely surreal moments. You've got this teapot that is David Bowie, for instance. So there's that. And then you've got one of the all-time great performances. I was watching parts of it again today. Kyle MacLachlan in it is amazing. He plays the Bob version of Special Agent Dale Cooper, whose looks and feels just totally different. Then he's Dougie, the simpleton, who doesn't know how to use the bathroom, certainly can't drive. And then finally he's like, I'm with the FBI, and he's Special Agent Dale Cooper again. And you believe that 100%. You believe all of it 100%. It almost, even though they're doppelgangers, it's almost hard to believe it's the same person who is the bad Dale Cooper and Dougie Jones, because they look and sound so different, and the performances are so different just in every way, the way they hold their bodies and the way they express themselves. It's really an amazing performance. I don't understand why he's not in a lot more movies than he is in.
It is odd.
It is odd,
It's
right?
odd, yes,
because
I agree.
That performance is astounding. Astounding. And as Dougie Jones, man, there are some moments when he puts the tie over his head and he doesn't know how to tie the tie, and he's having pancakes with his son and stuff. Like, I love that. I'm not going to say anything more about it. Find it. You can get it on Blu-ray, and there's all sorts of extras. It's got some amazing extras. If you're a Twin Peaks fan, for sure. Even if you're not a Twin Peaks fan, it's a standalone amazing film. Part 8 alone, as an experimental film, 1 hour.
Never seen anything like Episode 8.
Nope.
Ever.
Nope. It blew the roof off of everything.
Nope.
It blew the roof off of everything. And then you get, I love parts 17 and 18, but part 16 is the one that really gets me. After I was done with part 16, after we saw that, we were watching it in that summer, I was like, if it ends here, I'm completely okay with it. You get 2 more episodes that ran back to back then the next week, maybe 2 weeks later, that are the final parts. And they're really great. But boy, episode 16, as a Twin Peaks fan, I was ready to walk off there. We were done. And Audrey's dance can happen, and I can be done.
Yes. And watching that in real time when it was playing in the summer of 2017 was one of my greatest TV memories.
Yes. Yes. 100 times yes.
Waiting from week to week to find out what was going to happen. It felt like a very old school anticipation moment. You had to wait to find out what was going to happen. And it was great, like talking to people every week about what you thought was going to happen. And I just respect the fact they did not release that as a binge watch moment.
Yeah, I don't think you can binge watch it. I mean, you can, but
sure,
boy,
you can, yeah, but
I don't think you should.
I don't feel like it would be as effective just
It's
for
not.
me. Yeah,
You need to let that weight of each episode kind of sink in a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's the first episodes might drive you a little mad in that they're so slow and so surreal at times. And one of the things I love about what David Lynch does with this movie is he's obviously got a lot of budget to work with. He had complete creative control. Showtime didn't do anything, and I imagine executives had to be pulling out their hair as they're seeing the first few parts of it because it's not a moneymaker.
Yep.
But one of the things that I really love is how even though he had this budget, I could recreate a lot of the special effects in Adobe Premiere. Not even After Effects.
Yeah.
I could do it in Adobe Premiere.
It's pretty low tech, a lot of it.
It's really low tech, and it works brilliantly somehow.
Small effects budget.
Yes.
Yeah, it was so neat how he did that. Like, so you don't have to have the best effects for great storytelling, obviously. And, you know, you can point to all sorts of movies throughout the last 10 years that had great effects that didn't make for great storytelling. Here, David Lynch does great storytelling with the most basic of effects. Again, I could create it in Adobe Premiere, in the titling.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you about this. And the only thing that prevented me from putting it at the top of my list was my old fuddy-duddy definition of movie.
Right.
But I totally agree. This was like one of my favorite things. And I love Twin Peaks. I've always loved Twin Peaks, the original Twin Peaks, the movie, The Fire Walk with Me, and this.
Yep.
Check out our previous podcast about this.
Check out our previous podcast. And the thing that I admired most about Twin Peaks The Return is that David Lynch did not let the story be fan-sourced. Because I had a lot of expectations of what I wanted it to be as a Twin Peaks fan. And I think everyone did. And I think a lot of content creators get caught up in, we need to give the fans what they think they want. This is not that. This is clearly David Lynch saying, I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't care if you follow me. And it was all new and fresh and weird and exciting and unexpected. And that strangely in this day and age, that feels very brave.
Yeah,
that's true.
To do that.
Rian Johnson got hammered for being kind of brave and not giving fans exactly what they wanted with the
Star
Last
Wars,
Jedi.
With Last Jedi, yes, yeah.
And you know, again, what made Star Wars special was that it did all these different things originally. It wasn't just a cookie cutter, like like a couple of the Star Wars movies since then. I think what David Lynch did in not listening to just trying to service fans made it all better. I didn't want just a rehash of Laura Palmer again.
Right.
We do revisit Laura Palmer, and she's integral to the story. Overall,
it's not how I thought it was going to end up, though.
Nope, not at all. And no way. And bully for David Lynch and Mark Frost for having the chutzpah to do that, and for Showtime for letting them do that. Because giving people a budget like that, when you're trying to take chances like that, most producers aren't going to say, "Wait a minute, you're not going to make it so that every Twin Peaks fan is happy right away." Like, I want to make money, so you've got to really convince producers that. And he's David Lynch; he can do it. He can say, I'm David Lynch and make stuff. You know, you're going to give me a budget, but it's tough to do. It's tough to do, and it really takes a lot of chutzpah to do so. So easily my number one. It's art. It's great movie making. It's great music performances too. Eddie Vedder's performance in part 16, I just love. I was crying watching it. You guys
You've been
think
crying
all I
a
do
lot.
is cry. But I was crying in part of nostalgia, but in part just because of what's being said in the story via song. And so, and I think it's neat too that David Lynch went out and found all these. Most of the episodes end with a musical performance, and I think that's really cool. Yeah. I think it's a really cool way to kind of bookend everything and to keep it moving along. So
I'm ready to go back to Twin Peaks. He should do another one. He might. He says maybe.
He says he's got gold, or he's got ideas and wants to see if they're gold or not.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. I don't think Heather's on this train.
No.
But Heather.
But you've got a number one film.
But Heather does have a number one pick, and I'm dying to know what it is.
Well, I'll preface this with, I had a really hard time with making this list. I had a hard time making the 15, and then I had a hard time making the 5. So just because this is my one does not mean it's my ultimate favorite. It is one of the things that I think is my top 5. I had to pick a documentary because I am in my heart a documentarian. So I picked a Werner Herzog documentary. I did not pick the same one that Rusty picked. I picked Into the Abyss for lots of reasons, but I love his documentaries much, much more than I do his narratives. But I picked this one because I think this was made in the early, 2011. So it's not, it's not up to date, but I think it's valid and important because it's a commentary on criminal justice system and the death penalty, and it presents one story, or one incident that caused these two men to be convicted. One was sentenced to the death penalty, and one was sentenced to 40 years. And it's Werner interviewing them. He also interviews the family of them and the family of the victims. It's not necessarily, it's definitely not a documentary trying to say they're innocent in any way, shape, or form. They both admit what they did.
Well, kind of. They admitted it, but the one guy is like,
but
now he says he didn't, right?
Well, he's waffling, but there's no question. This is not oh, did they really did it kind of thing.
Not making a murderer.
Right. No, it's not a true crime in that way. It's a commentary on the justice system and the death penalty that I think is really important. And it's asking why one guy got 40 years and one guy got the death penalty, and actually questioning the validity and the usefulness of the death penalty. I think it's honest, that when he's interviewing the two men, they're just who they are. I mean, they're not, and one of them, I think there's important points where they're interviewing him, and one of them talks about how he skipped a scholarship and didn't go on to go to college. And that's a moment. It reminds you, everyone, whether you're white or black or anyone, man, woman, you make decisions in your life that are going to affect the rest of them. And even though they're not all like, I murdered this dude, they're often, I didn't take this opportunity when I had it. And I think anyone can find something common to think about, something useful in this movie. And it's just beautiful storytelling because he kind of lets them tell their story. And even though they're not the smartest guys and you don't want this guy to be your roommate, you see their humanity in that they're not necessarily hugely remorseful. But they do question how they got there and why they're there. And it's very sad. I'm not a death penalty proponent. I don't think that it solves anything. And the last interview with the one guy was 8 days before he was executed. And it sort of brings that true humbleness to him, and how is it that he's the one that gets executed and the other guy, who is probably just as guilty, even though he doesn't want to 100% admit it, is only getting 40 years. And you're still it's a human story. And it also questions whether or not, like, if you're pro death penalty or not. And
well, and Werner says he's against the death penalty, but I don't get the sense that the movie's trying to make that point necessarily, right? Isn't it letting viewers kind of...
Well, they say, yeah, sure. It does. I mean, he's not hitting you over the head with, I'm anti-death penalty for sure. It doesn't, I mean, I've not been, I think at one point in my life I probably would have been like, yes, death penalty. But as I've gotten older and realized that that's not really a deterrent, you're letting the state, allowing the state to murder someone, and how we have so many false convictions, incorrect convictions, that we have no business killing anyone for anything. So yes, if you're looking for a very definite hit you over the head, don't support the death penalty. That's not what this is. This is really telling their story and how they got there, why they're there, giving you kind of a little background on them. And also, I think the important part was that he interviewed the victim's family and their family and how that affected them. Like, that's huge. And I think that's an important part of the documentary too. Anyways, I think it's one of Werner's best. When he's with humans, like, I'm not a fan of Cave of Forgotten Dreams, actually. When he's with humans is when he excels. Yeah. And anyways, if you're going to watch a Werner doc, watch this or Cave of Forgotten Dreams, but I'm a little biased.
Yes. We know what you're saying. Don't watch Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
I think you're fine if you're patient. Yeah. You'll enjoy it, but I couldn't get through it. So, but I love his ones where he's interviewing people, even though he's obnoxious sometimes. I'm like, Werner, shut up. Just be quiet. We don't want to hear you. We want to hear the people talk, but because he interjects at like the most inner.
Although I do love his voice.
But his voice, yes.
I really
and
love his voice.
I love him just as a human.
Yes.
I love him so.
Yes.
And you're just, I'm not like this expert documentarian, but as one who has made documentaries, I've just always made a point to not put myself in them. Right. And so his like obnoxiously, I'm going to chime in there, kind of goes against what I learned, but I appreciate it still. Because when he's asking questions, it's usually important.
He seems to always take an anti-journalistic approach to documentary filmmaking.
Yes.
Like, he doesn't worry about injecting
No.
himself.
No.
He doesn't worry about not being subjective.
Like, silly me for even thinking about that. I'm still the auteur, and I will present the story.
Yeah, because
yeah.
because he understands that he's a filmmaker and he's going to have a point of view, and that's going to come across in the
Right.
film. And I think that's important that he acknowledges that and doesn't try to hide it, because he's such a huge personality.
Right.
He can't hide that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I picked a documentary for my number one because I think narrative is important as well, but documentaries are one of the most important, in my opinion, because it shows you slices of life that you're not going to normally see. And it's more accessible than people think, you know? And my little pitch is that there's so many out there, you should watch some. And maybe
yeah.
this is one of them. So, you know.
That's the best endorsement. There's lots of docs out there, and this is one of them.
It is. And it's really
great.
good.
And
It's
it's
a
really
very
great.
human story.
Yes.
And it just sort of makes me angry about the death penalty and
Mm-hmm.
how our system works and all of that. These dudes deserve to be in prison. I'm not saying that in
What they
any
did
way.
was so senseless.
Right.
They start with killing a woman because they want to steal her son's car.
Right. And it was
They
all
didn't
about
have
the
to kill her.
yeah. It
And
was. They wanted to call the movie company wanted to call it Red Corvette because that's what they stole.
yeah.
But Werner said no because he didn't want to commercialize it.
Too
Yeah.
commercial.
Yeah, he didn't want to.
I
Too
love
commercial.
it. He didn't want to like anyone go buy a Corvette because of this movie or whatever.
Well, and he didn't think that it was a very evocative title, is the
No,
other thing
right.
he said. And the one thing I want to say about the death penalty too is like this happened in Texas, right?
Oh, that's the king state of
It's
death
the
penalty.
king state of death penalty. These guys had no qualms about killing this woman,
No.
even though she would have let them take the car.
Yep.
So it obviously didn't stop them from killing anyone.
Right.
Not at all.
No. Well, and it also brings to point the whole senselessness of violence
Yeah.
when you don't think about it. Like, I'm a true crime fan. I love podcasts and TV shows and stuff, but I don't like you're not going to get that answer all the time of why they did it. Some violence is senseless oftentimes. And so this is not solving that either. It's just making a comment on one split-second decision that these two made together
Yeah.
cost them this woman's life over a car.
Or
How
a stupid
little
red
and
car.
stupid is that?
Right.
And so that's also like something to ponder. Like, you know, maybe you should take a little bit longer to think about what you're doing. You know,
Yeah.
but then there's others of us who overanalyze like me. But anyways, it's a good stuff, and I think I highly recommend it.
You know, the word meditation is thrown around for a lot of films, and I really feel like this is a meditation on
Yes.
the death penalty.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is that. It really is just like, think about it. Think about it from this person's point of view, and now this person, and think about the whole thing, and think about the state and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Somebody has to actually kill these people.
Yeah, it always
Yeah.
amazes me how, on one hand, someone will complain about the government and how they don't like them and they're crooked, yet you're going to let them murder someone.
Yeah. I don't want them involved
And
in my
it's-
health care,
yeah.
but
I'm
Right.
going to let you fry him in the electric chair.
Yeah.
Blows my mind. Like, anyways, that's a whole other thing.
but that's a really
but-
great film.
It's a good film and worth
And
watching.
it's not a polemic, which I like.
It is, like, as much
It
as I'm
presents a lot
being
of
polemic,
information.
it's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't make a judgment on that. It just presents it as it is. Here we are.
It respects you as a viewer.
Yes.
By
It
giving
doesn't
you
try to push you
information.
either way.
Yes.
So it's worth a watch, especially even whatever side you're on. It's worth a watch.
And we're going to be delving into the cinema of Werner Herzog on a future broadcast not too far down the road.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Heather's very excited about it.
She is very
thrilled.
excited.
We'll see.
Fitzcarraldo.
Oh, Lord. Lord help me.
And Rusty and I will be talking about Twin Peaks off mic, I'm sure,
For years.
for years.
Oh, yep.
So my number one pick we already discussed, but it is The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson from 2012. I just think it is a shattering, like really just shattering emotional look at someone who's a lost soul.
Going through PTSD.
Going through PTSD, who's looking for any kind of meaning and happens to fall into this cult under a very charismatic charlatan who decides to lead him down the wrong path. But I think it's very timely. It's set in the post-World War II era, based on Scientology, based on L. Ron Hubbard, but it's very timely to our modern era of why people who are on the fringes follow people maybe they shouldn't be following,
Yeah.
Looking for something.
who are working against their best interest. And it's, to me, it's endlessly rewatchable. I just think it's great. And I'm also fascinated by Scientology. I watch all the Scientology documentaries and read all the books. And
I still don't understand.
And this film is officially not about L. Ron Hubbard or the Church of Scientology. It's officially not, but it is.
It clearly is.
Lots of parallels.
Yes.
It clearly is.
Yes. And Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Amy Adams are incredible in this film.
Well, and I say it's about Scientology. That's not ostensibly what it's about. That is about, it's an aspect of what it's about. Is
I'll lead you
Scientology
to
and the cult. Yeah.
It's not an expose of the church. It's that Scientology is almost like the MacGuffin in the film.
Yeah, yeah.
That you go in thinking that's what it's about, but that's just one choice that he made, that he could have fallen into anything. It just happened to have been this particular belief system.
He could be selling you anything. It just happens to be that.
Yes. This film's about belief systems and how those can be both helpful and dangerous. And this just happened to be Scientology in this film.
And it's timely because every year there's a new person selling you something.
It's always something.
For sure.
Yep. And be on your guard.
I won't mention anything, but every year there's
someone new.
And I just roll my eyes and say, no one should like anyone that much. That's how my belief is.
Yes. Don't give yourself over to anyone else's way of thinking.
Nope.
Think for yourself.
Yep.
But and as the master shows, it's difficult when you've been broken into pieces.
Yep.
Whether it's by war or whatever it is, living situations, alcoholism, which factors in the film. But there is redemption. You can get through it. So yeah, great film. One of the many great Paul Thomas Anderson films.
All of them are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we're just kind of wrapping up, I wonder if you could just very briefly just give me one film that you think from the decade that did not get as much attention as it maybe should have.
Okay. It's hard to pick one, but I'll tell you, I'm going to do two, Jeff. I can't help it.
Okay.
So I'm going to do Under the Skin. Under the Skin deserves a lot of attention. If we had done our composite thing, it probably ends up number 2 because Jeff and I had it so high on our lists. So Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson is an amazing little sci-fi piece. And then the other one, if we're talking about documentaries and things that are breaking ground and where I see film going in the next 10 years, it's a documentary called Leviathan, which follows a fishing boat from the coast of Massachusetts. And it's all these GoPros, and there's no dialogue in it. You can hear people talking sometimes, but it's all garbled. They've purposefully garbled the dialogue so that that's not what you're paying attention to. Instead, you're paying attention to I wouldn't call it symbiotic because they're working against each other, but the ocean, the fish, the atmosphere, the people, they're all working in harmony in this kind of symphony. And with all these GoPros, have you seen it, Heather?
I have not.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's got these GoPro cameras just all over the boat, and sometimes they go off the boat into the water, and it's bobbing along with the fish, and the seagulls are coming. Some of the shots are mind-boggling. The final shot is just like, what am I seeing exactly?
Yep.
So Leviathan is one. It's not for everybody. It is not for everybody.
No.
But
for some people, it's everything.
It's everything.
Yes,
and
it's great.
As far as the future of film and the future of documentaries, Leviathan is it. So,
I would shout out to Us by Jordan Peele. Honestly, it should have been on my original 15 and it wasn't. But anyways, because I still think about that movie.
Oh yeah.
And then Hereditary, that mess. It messed me up, but
yes.
So be prepared. But anyways, both of those I think they got decent press, but they kind of faded away. Honestly, Lupita Nyong'o should have gotten a nomination for Best Actress for Us. She did crazy good job in Us. I think it was a shame and a total travesty that she didn't get nominated for Us.
I agree.
But anyways, those are my two.
That's great. I guess the two that I would give a shout out to is our first Reformed, the Paul Schrader film with Ethan Hawke, which came out in 2017. That's an amazing film about faith and belief also, and one of the best performances I've seen of the decade came from Ethan Hawke in First Reformed. It's incredible. And Paul Schrader, of course, is amazing. And the other film is Baby Driver, which I love, which is, I realize on my list, is the film that I watched the most, because I watch that film a lot because it's an action musical where the musical numbers are actually action sequences and a lot of amazing music. I like musicals, as we've talked about, and this is a musical. Edgar Wright, filmmaker, great. Baby Driver. Check it out.
So you have so many movies you can check out that you haven't caught. We've given you lots to watch.
Yes. And there's a new decade happening right now. So we'll keep watching.
Right now.
And thinking. It's happening as we're speaking. Well, thank you, Rusty and Heather. That was great.
Thanks,
and
Jeff.
Long.
It was a whole decade.
That's
oh my God, it was long.
And a hard
yes.
Topic to really tackle. I can't tell you, I've shown Heather and Jeff my list. I've watched so many movies in the last 2 months. Again, I've been unemployed, so I get to.
Yeah, at the time.
But yeah, it's been really fun, but it's also been mind-boggling at times trying to figure out Call Me By Your Name or Spider-Verse.
Because they must be compared to each other.
They must be compared to one another.
That's why lists are crazy.
And Leviathan.
So
great stuff, you guys.
Yes, that's great. So thanks. So listeners, you can listen to this podcast in 2 parts if you want. How about that?
Probably not a bad idea.
Yeah. Or at least have a bathroom break. Okay. So thanks, Rusty and Heather. Please make sure that you check us out on all of our platforms.
Apple Podcast. It's not iTunes anymore, by the way. It's on Apple Podcast.
That's right.
Oh, Apple
That's
Podcasts,
right.
yes.
And Stitcher and Facebook.
YouTube.
And
YouTube. Mm-hmm. Great. Yes. Check us out everywhere you can. And make sure that you join us next time, because we're going to look at rule number 402 of the Many Rules of Film Club, which is, if you are a convenience store clerk and you dream of becoming a filmmaker, clearly you must be inspired by one man, and that is Kevin Smith. So we are going to be talking about the career and the films of Kevin Smith next time on the Many Rules of Film Club. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.